Right now, somewhere in the world, a business is hemorrhaging money because their checkout system is down. The alerts are firing, the war room is assembling, and fingers are pointing in every direction. The network team says it's not them. Application team, well, they insist their code is just fine. Infrastructure is pointing at the database. Meanwhile, customers are abandoning their carts and revenue is evaporating by the minute. Sound familiar? This isn't just a technical problem, it's a business problem masquerading as a technical one, and it reveals a fundamental gap in how most organizations think about their technology operations. Well, I'm Rob Boyd, and this is WWT Presents Research. Today, we are diving into the fourth and final automation priority from our 2025 research, full context operations. It's the capstone that transforms all your monitoring data, automation investments, and AI initiatives into something that actually moves the business needle. My guest today is Tree Lindemann-Michael, practice lead for AI Ops at Worldwide Technology. Tree has watched organizations struggle with this exact challenge. Brilliant technical teams working in silos, unable to connect their expertise to business outcomes. Now, Tree simplifies full context operations as the entire IT organization working together in lockstep. But getting there?
Yes.
That's where things get interesting.
WWT Presents Research.
Welcome to Worldwide Technology Presents Research. You're actually the penultimate episode here, the tip of the triangle. Step four, priority four is the way I need to be saying it. But priority four around full context operations. Before we get into what that means, do you mind telling us what do you do for Worldwide?
Yeah, hi. As you said, my name is Tree. I am a practice lead for the AI Ops and Observability practice within Worldwide. I help our field sales team sort of qualify opportunities and identify opportunities within the tumultuous world of observability and AI Ops. Ideally, there are big, hairy questions, and I help find solutions to answer those questions.
Yeah, it's funny how observability and then AI Ops, they do feel like they're very much related. Be hard to have the one without the other. But they also seem like these are big areas where I feel like there's not a single organization I've ever met with, and I don't meet as many as you, but I feel like that's something they're all striving to say, no matter how mature they are, they sure would like to be a little bit better. And they could always identify places where they feel a little bit more blind, perhaps, than they should be. And they know that that's holding them back. But we're going to get into how to do that kind of stuff. And that's what we've been doing throughout this series. So I appreciate your time on that one. And I think you're perfect for this. Let's get straight into it. Full context operations. What is meant by that term? And why is it its own priority, but yet it's the fourth in the series of four priorities? Is that on purpose?
Yes, and it's sort of at the end mainly because there's a whole bunch of scaffolding and pipeline that needs to be put in place in order to even begin to marry all of the information or all of the context within the organization into something that can be used for your operational team. And that's one reason why we put at the end. We just need to build up to understanding how the bits and bytes actually translate to dollars and cents on the business side.
Well, I wonder if you could define it, because I wouldn't do a good job with it, because my loose understanding is around, hey, we're connecting very important but disparate information, but we're not just collecting it. It's very much, pointing towards achieving something specific, perhaps. How do you define full context operations?
Simply put, it's the entire IT organization working together in lockstep. Starts right on the back of a business card. That would be it. Right now, we currently have traditional IT organizations which are working in their silos. They have their own budgets, they have their own mission, they have their own goals, and sometimes those goals don't align perfectly with where the business wants to go into the future, or even rapidly in like the next 6 to 8 months. When we talk about timelines of using AI, since that industry is evolving very rapidly, and the need to respond to change is actually very pressing. And so being able to take your IT organization and sort of pivot when you need to is incredibly effective. And right now, most organizations don't have that nimbleness. They're in the traditional monolith of, network, you do your network thing, storage, you do your storage thing, cloud, do your cloud thing. And they're not talking to each other on a high level. And so the context above how all those things relate to each other is missing from our purview. We really understand our business from a hardware perspective. Are the devices up? Are they reporting data. We don't really know if the network device over there is actually causing my application to be diminished in capacity. That's what we mean by full context.
It feels like something that just kind of generally takes in all the lessons we've been trying to promote. It feels like for a lifetime. But for some reason, I wouldn't say anything's new here, right? What's the historical context for being able to even get to this point these days? What do you think's driving it?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that are driving it. One is the scale of these operations. We really haven't ever had a time where hyperscalers have hundreds of thousands of devices out in the wild, and we're just defined a need to understand a source of truth in the sense of what's actually out there in the wild, what
Yeah.
devices are deployed, how are they being deployed. Is there a automated IT asset lifecycle management such that when I want to deploy something, I can do it relatively cleanly? I take an existing config, apply it to a device, push it out through some automated pipeline, or I'm decommissioning a device, I'm removing it from my capitalization costs, and that has monetary implications to it. I need to be able to do that with a push of a button, and somebody needs to be able to get that notification that I need to actually physically walk to a rack and remove it
Mm.
so that I can actually be decommissioned in a decommissioned state. That's like the foundation of any type of discussion here. What do I have, and how can I actually deploy stuff to go monitor it? And then in rolling into like the current state, so that's like past, we now have AI burgeoning into our industry, which is really a game changer. If you're not looking at some type of AI solution, I can guarantee a competitor is. And that nimbleness, being able to pivot, like I mentioned earlier, is something that is very valuable. And that's like the next step to be able to take something out there and integrate it with your own internal organizational processes and actually make it valuable. That's a difficult thing to do.
It's interesting. This whole research paper is obviously focused on automation and its automation priorities. But in every single deep dive on this, it seems to highlight this as being a necessity for even doing AI correctly. And I feel like sometimes it's the reverse and I'm curious if you're experiencing this. Do you have clients or anyone initially that is kind of conflating AI and automation, or under the impression now that they've seen what they can do with LLMs, specifically since that blew up, and you were doing this well before those kind of came into our consciousness. Has it made it difficult or easier for you to explain what's important about your data and moving that forward in this environment?
Good question. The AI revolution really has made it kind of difficult to separate the notion of automation and AI, because good automation looks like AI. It looks intelligent. It looks like it's been set up to respond to these dynamic shifting changes and changes in problems in our environment. In reality, it's thoughtful architecture and understanding how the business consumes technology to meet their business mission, essentially.
Yeah.
So once we understand how a server is installed and facilitates the business go to market, we can build discrete packages around that, essentially a box, and we can then templatize it or make a standard such that when a new one is created, I take the commonalities, apply it to the new one, and then if I need to customize it, I can based on a location's need or a specific operating requirement. Ideally, we're being more mindful in how we build technology, because in the past, it's really just been stand up the server so my developers can deploy to it so that we can make our web page and website available to the internet so that we can make money. And it's kind of the modus operandi at the moment.
Yeah.
Now that we have kind of these external pressures sort of tightening those budgets and keeping it so that we can't actually just spend or throw money at the problem, we have to be a little more elegant in our solutions.
Yeah. I appreciate that insight, because it does keep hitting us differently, and I do think it's going to continue to be a bit of a challenge. But for anyone that's wondering about, gosh, what do I do first out of all these things? It feels like consistently, even with our focus on automation here, everything here is such a specific thing that really needs to be done before you want to even go too far with AI. If your data is not in place, and clean, available, accessible, and you understand what you have and what you don't have, and you've got full understanding of these operations, throwing AI at something is only going to accelerate bad outcomes, I would think, or increase risk in ways that you probably can't even calculate if you don't even know.
We have data being ingested, and these LLMs and really any system of monitoring or observability is going to require some ingestion of data so that you can look at the discrete time differences. So like, what I mean by that is something happened a second ago, something's happening now, something's going to happen a second from now. And so the measurements from those discrete points sort of help form what we would consider a baseline or the exactness of the system. And so while we have that data, we need to get that data from where it's being gathered to where it can be meshed with other data. Right now, it's kind of in a singular pipeline from tool to tool dashboard to operator on the end. And that's kind of very serial. And what we're really trying to do is identify where the data targets are, like where are we gathering the data. It can be some CDS file, it could be a stream data stream, it could be HTTP request, it could be anything, just some piece of data. We need to find out where it is so that we can get it to some place, because ideally what we're going to want is to take that piece of data and compare it or understand it relative to another piece of data. And that's where like event correlation comes into play. And when you're talking about what new things have come into play that have allowed us to do this, the LLMs and the natural language processing of AI has allowed us to ask questions on that data very quickly. Normally, we would have been reliant on event correlators that do time-based categorical grouping and time entropy and chaos mapping and things like that. But in reality, now that we have this, dare I say, intelligent machine, you can feed it data and then ask it questions on an immense set of data that a person could never like understand in a small amount of time. And so that has really allowed us to say things like, given my entire environment or given my whole set of data, tell me the anomalies that are in it. And the AI is built to sort of understand those patterns and surface them to us. And so that's another really, really awesome thing that's come available.
Yeah, and I have this one fear that anybody watching this, I want to encourage everybody to go back, and certainly I'd love for you to watch all the videos that we've done on the previous steps here. They're very informative. Obviously, though, they're based on the paper, and that is the ultimate takeaway here is the research paper, because some of this stuff, it definitely builds on each other. So if some of this feels like we're moving fast, anybody watching this, I encourage them, that may be why it feels that way. But one of the things I like is the practical notion of how do we put this stuff into action? And every research paper has steps outlined as part of the kind of the template that they're using. Let me call these out, and then we'll start with the first one because I'd like to go into more detail with you. But there's 4 steps in this one that are outlined in the paper. Start with a critical user journey, then attribute business value to IT systems, then establish a baseline for system coverage, and number 4, foster collaboration. So going back to number 1, start with a critical user journey. This reminds me of a lot of things we've done in the past, but I know there's some interesting nuance to it in this application. But can you describe, what does that mean? What's important here?
Traditionally, when we talk about monitoring an environment, we really talk about up-down status of a service or a thing. Is it actually connected? And very much I attribute that to the health of a device or health of a website. The availability is a very common term in our site reliability engineer world. And that doesn't help us answer the question of, is this application doing its job? Which in reality, the job of an application or software is to support the business mission and to bring in revenue in some cases, or support revenue generating services. And so the question of how well is an application doing is kind of hard to answer when you don't know how an application actually impacts the business. What I mean by that is, if we were to take the checkout action of a common commercial application, I am a user, I am trying to buy something on your app, I put it in my cart and I click checkout and I can't pay for it. How does the business know that the error code, the 404, or the diminished performance of me clicking that button is actually related to a monetary cost to them as a business? I'm not going to buy that thing because I can't, I physically can't. How do you raise that information to the business? You really can't at this point with traditional monitoring, because we're all stuck in the bits and bytes. We're all trying to say how fast is that service going? How many responses is that service? It's disconnected, right? So the critical user journey is how you get the engineers who are building the applications in the mindset of the business, which is why this application even matters. Why are we paying somebody to build this application? Well, it's because it makes the business money, which we can actually measure based on the number of responses and how fast they're being served to the customer. And that's where the user journey sort of wraps it around and brings it back to the technical, which is, well, what can we measure to actually get that dollar and cent amount?
How do you document something like that? Because I feel like going through that becomes a good exercise, but is there a normal way of going about documentation. I had trouble wrapping my head around, okay, I get how to do that. Maybe I do it for one, but now how do I do it so I can make them easily comparable and digestible by whatever needs to happen next, perhaps?
Yeah, this is a good question. When I was a software developer, one of the ways that I would prove that my code worked was through test-driven development, and it provided me a framework to create logical code or logical written code that was objectively true. And the same thing can kind of be applied to building software systems. When we think of just building software, just writing code, but that code is essentially runs on servers or hardwares and it's facilitated through a network, which is the glue between these things. And these all can be measured and they all have a expected behavior. And that expected behavior is tied directly to some type of business outcome. That deliberate flow of understanding how a request that originates from my software flows across the hardware and the business out into the internet kind of needs to be understood by the people writing the software and the people who are provisioning the hardware, and essentially all of the people involved need to understand how they are essentially part of a large flow. And that's when I talked about earlier, our IT organizations are in silos. That makes it traditionally it makes it difficult to talk across the teams. The applications teams rarely talk to the hardware teams.
Yeah.
And that's just from a historical sense, that's what we didn't do. But now we are essentially one team. Software developers can write containerized apps that have abstracted hardware out of the picture. We don't really need a hardware guy, and you have a hyperscaler like AWS or Microsoft or Google that can kind of abstract that for you. And so the software developers really need to sort of understand how everything fits together, and that's just bringing the team together essentially.
Yeah.
So
well, and it feels like it's always been hard because it's like, well, what becomes that rally point that you can all focus on? And here you're saying it's the outcome. It's the what do I contribute in the path to reaching this? And it kind of reminds me of dependency mapping and such like that, to understand the part that you play. And it probably segues quite well, and hopefully not too redundantly, but what we talk about, number 2, attribute business value to your IT systems. I don't know if that's worded IT systems is kind of a generic, but what's important to understand? How do you go about doing actually assigning that dollar value? I assume that's why it's second behind doing the persona mapping.
it's the dependency mapping. It's identifying each link in the chain and understanding how its relative weaknesses to the integrations of the other 2 chains holding it. If we think about software, it's really just handing off data to each system going up and down the OSI layer. And if we can understand the waterfall nature of these requests as they go through the system, one happens after the other, and these serial events can be measured, quantified, discrete units, and labeling them is important. And so a big portion of the people and process part of this transformation is understanding, like you said, your role in that chain as an end user who wants to pay for the cart or buy something or do a transfer, do a deal. You need to understand that some part of this process goes wrong. If it's labeled well, you can quickly go to the part and say, well, what's the expression of the fingerprint of this outage? And since we've had some of these before, or I have good telemetry monitoring, I can identify that quickly, and I know the people that can solve that problem instead of bringing everyone into the group, which is our war room, which is currently what we do,
help on a call,
and try to prove our innocence.
Yeah.
So it's important. It's difficult at the beginning because we usually lack the required data to answer the questions, and so we spend a lot of time measuring things or putting measuring sticks in place to measure stuff.
Yeah.
And that can take a long time. Ideally, you're doing this automation so that as you do it for one, you can roll it out to the other one really quickly.
Yeah. So the hard part is something, don't stress, expect some pressure, some resistance at the beginning, but don't forget it's not like this every time. And it becomes something.
Sometimes you have to walk before you run.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to crawl before you walk.
Yeah.
You have to go slow before you go fast. That's the agile way, because sometimes we're working so hard in a direction that we are accumulating our technical debt in the background and we're not paying attention to it. Sometimes these get so burdensome to carry it forward that it's causing our forward velocity to be impacted. And so sometimes you really just have to stop, turn around, address some of it so that you can go forward again.
When you start breaking down a process like that, you begin realizing that it's not a good process, or it's not as good as it could be. And it has too many things that could break easily, or maybe too much human input in certain areas that are causing problems. Is that a typical part of the process, and we should have that in mind as
Yes.
we're going forward?
Yes. And that's actually a really big one. Even worldwide ourselves, when we started using Big Panda for our event correlator, we had the same issue as most of the companies. You have a small IT team supporting a very large business on the front end, and the question is, well, how do you not drown in the volume of events and alerts that come through on a day-to-day basis? And our answer here was we'll use an event correlator tool. And what it found is as we started correlating things together, the question was, well, who gets assigned the incident?
Mm.
It's a fairly simple question,
Sounds simple.
huge ramifications.
Yeah.
And so we found that, oh, well, we actually don't have our priority of tagging incidents in such a way that's standardized that we can't actually give it to a person that is an owner of an application. And so we had to go back to the drawing board and sort of understand how we want people to be notified and raised, or how and where they can be notified. And like you mentioned, we hit our kind of roadblock. We eventually applied a solution to it, and now we have our automated instance being routed to the correct people because we started using our change management in ServiceNow. And so the owners are in a very static spot, and it's easy to find who they are. And if somebody moves from a project, it gets updated, and it's all automated so that it can be manageable.
Yeah. And I assume that goes to the same point you made before, which is once you've thought through kind of those type of things, the next time you run across that with the next process and the team people involved in that, it gets easier. Trying to think, is there a way to kind of ease your way into this and get your training wheels comfortable?
We tried to start with the application teams. That's if I were to attribute priority to an application team, they're the tip of the pyramid. Essentially the work they do actually gets touched by the end users.
Yeah.
And so, but it's really hard to change the processes because deploying stuff into the wild, it usually has change management processes, which is a whole nother can of worms. Essentially, how do I take my code, how do I write code and then push it through my environments and get it to production? Given that this software writing supports our business, and if it goes down, I can lose money. So you're right there. Infrastructure has a better time, mainly because the life cycles of it are relatively longer. Deploying a server out in the wild is sits there and it stays there, and I can SSH through it and manage it from outside. And so my change management isn't as needed. And so if we were to ask, where should I start? What's the lowest hanging fruit, or what's probably the best place to start with the highest success? I would say the network team. And the reason for that is because the network team sees everything. They're the glue in between all of these services and disparate thing. They're the arbiters and brokers between the internet and the business. And they see all the data. They don't know why it's happening, but they can see it. Mm-hmm. And so we've seen huge success with things like our natural language processor AIs that are able to just ingest all the events. And like you said, you just talk to it conversationally and it will tell you what's going on, because again, it can see what's going on. It doesn't know why, but it says, well, this request is coming over here and we're getting widget errors, and the request flowing over that device is also having this deluge of errors, and it's flapping. This device has been flapping for 2 years, so you don't really need to worry about it because we don't notice any changes. So maybe you want to tune the events.
No one's
getting the events.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so things like that have really enabled the network team to get that breathing room to say, hey guys, we know it's not our problem. And the chatbot sort of shows them that through the events and says, well, here's where the issue is. And it's a very administratively based solution where scaling that to the other organizations is a little difficult.
Yeah. It's a good one to learn on, though, because at least you can maybe just build some confidence with that before you take on the additional hairy problems you're going to encounter in applications.
Yes, often it's hard to get huge transformational change as your first step. Usually it's hey, we're gonna take a bite of the whale and show that it's possible, and then keep taking bites of the whale as we go along. And hopefully as we're automating along the way, the bites become automatic and we have a machine that starts biting the whale for us. And so I'm really worried about, the parts of the whale that are different from other parts I've eaten. And so then we can focus on new problems that we haven't faced before. And that's the accelerative effect of the automation in this journey.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the word momentum. And it's easy to forget, I think, when you're in the middle of feeling how painful something like this is, that you are right on the edge of perhaps never know where it's going to be, but you'll know it in hindsight. And at that point, when you start scaling out, and this is when things start building on each other and those previous investments and pain you put in begin to pay off. Now, I assume this becomes part of measuring it, but number 3 in our steps is establish a baseline for system coverage. Is that about knowing where you are versus where you are going to be, or being able to say you've made progress in certain areas? Or probably much more than that.
Yes, and to put it simply, it's the hypothesis based experimentation of monitoring a system. Very often, we've been in a estimate based
Mhm.
paradigm for
Don't need to be too
monitoring,
exact.
where
It's roughly this.
yeah, it's our
Yeah.
best guess. It's based on feeling. I, as an application owner, don't feel like the application works that way because in the past it hasn't, and so,
Yeah.
or I've been at the company for 8 years and I've seen this event come up all the time, so I know it's not that big of a deal. Like those type of things are in my opinion, that's bad practice, but it's necessary practice for people's sanity in the ground, in the weeds, right? We need to be able to solve the problems, and there are just so much stuff out there. But when we talk about actually making change, I mentioned earlier, as I wrote software, how do I know the code that I write is actually correct? I'm just writing code. I'm
Yeah.
not actually interrogating it as I write. And so the notion of test-driven development, which is writing a failing test for the right reason, and then writing code to pass that test, your code works because you've essentially fixed the problem that you created for yourself in a controlled manner. And so you created a control, you made an experiment, and then you validated the experiment with hypothesis. You came to a conclusion. It's the same way with monitoring. And that's where we're moving into because the stakes are too high. The cost of our tools are so high, the cost of not being able to do business is so high. And so being able to approach this problem from a scientific method or scientific process, which is I'm making a hypothesis, I'm going to do something to validate the hypothesis, and then I will conclude my results. And that really allows us to start making changes to our IT system and measuring them, because very often we'll get new C-level leaders or new people on the team, and they'll make changes. And very often the question is, well, how well are our change? Did anything even change?
Yeah.
And so with monitoring and baselining, you essentially gather the norm. And so for, again, another software analogy, when I didn't have tests, when I came into a monolith project and it's like, here's software you've inherited, go write new software. It's a very dangerous place to be, because how do you know if what you're writing isn't going to break the system?
Yeah.
Well, you do black box based testing. You run the system, you see what outputs it gives you, and now you have a control. You literally interrogate the functions and they give an output, and then that's your test output. And whether or not it's right or wrong, that's what is. And so then when
Yeah.
people say, when you write code or you make a change to the system, people say, well, it's not supposed to do that. Well, you can say, well, that's what it's always been doing. So either this is a bug
By the
or it's
way.
actually a feature. It's a liberating experience, honestly, being able to have that conversation with data backing your opinion, instead of when somebody challenging you and saying, well, it shouldn't be doing that. And you just inherited this software, you inherited this IT system, and they say, well, it shouldn't be doing that. And what is your response? You either say, oh, okay, I'll try and fix it, which they've just essentially handed you an unsolvable problem,
Yeah.
or you can say, no, this is the way it is. And if it isn't supposed to be this way, we can now have a conversation to negotiate how we should go forward. And again, that's such a powerful discussion.
Yeah.
And it enables you to actually have a discussion about the right things, the performance and the numbers, instead of feelings, which are kind of not really quantifiable in this case.
Oh, exactly. And this may be a little bit of divergence here, but you're making me think. So one of the things, I don't have your software experience, but one thing I've always been attracted to as I've been around network technology and just engineers in general is I feel like there is something that's always been attractive about the binary nature of being able to test things and say, if this fails and why, and being able to trace things through it, being able to think logically and not emotionally about certain things. Do you feel like AI is starting to cloud some of this now that we have so much of a black box? We don't know why AI makes some of the decisions it makes. Now, I know this doesn't relate to automation per se, but it's interesting how I feel like it's pulling, some of our hard-won knowledge and capabilities and gut instincts in different directions now as we move forward, and then maybe the type of stuff that you're promoting here in terms of what we're talking about becomes not so much something we strive for, but something we have to do because there's no other way to keep up as well.
Yeah, it's hard to rationalize something that doesn't fit your worldview, especially when there's
Wow, that
data.
is a heavy statement. Yeah, I love that.
And that's one reason why I like the observability world, is because my world is grounded in facts and measurable things.
Yeah.
And so I have graphs and pie charts, and and data to sort of back up the things that I say. And so I can say them very confidently because you just point at this and say, well, the machine's not lying to me. It's gathering data on a some interval and it can't lie to me. So this is the way it is. And you can either accept reality or not and be left by the wayside.
We thought the pace of acceleration was fast 10 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And now
It's light speed.
and organizations
we're in
really
plaid
can't move
speed
any
right now.
faster, especially governments. But
You're right. And that's one reason why we focus on not pushing new tools, but to understand how tools are being used today and really how to
I like that.
automate the business. The business really needs to standardize in such a way that they can automate. And if you can't do that, I'm not really sure where the bespoke nature of business is in the future, because unless you're doing something truly unique, somebody's going to be able to do it for faster, cheaper, and better.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not keeping up with the automation. I mean, automation is one of those low-hanging fruits to compete at this point.
The fourth one, let's make sure we keep moving forward here. Foster collaboration. And I'm curious within this one, because I assume this is where we're bringing in some people aspects and such. As you've worked with a variety of clients that are at various degrees of maturity and full context operations, what is the right way to start, communicate? Are there some things that we should be aware of in terms of how we're presenting these projects or starting this thing off with certain groups that we should be wary of?
Yeah, this is a good one. When I was once recently on a large oil and gas workshop, and we were trying to measure the efficacy of a zero trust image for their laptop. Basically, they wanted an image for the laptops they gave the people, to their employees, so that the network communications were essentially a zero trust. It's a type of communication protocol that is, very secure.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is it's difficult to measure. It's difficult to understand if it's actually working. And so when they started rolling it out, essentially,
Yeah.
and so they started rolling it out. And when they rolled it out, there was a correlated event of increased campus calls to the T1 support, essentially saying that they're unable to access the tools of the trade, Teams, Outlook, you name it.
Not
so,
what you want to have happen on a rollout.
No, especially when you're trying to, make your organization more secure and facilitate your employee. When we sat everyone down, we probably got maybe 35 people on a room and said, okay, well, how do we measure the milestones between, an end user and the internet behind your firewalls? And so we found out there's like 15 different gates that need to get passed. And when we started asking people, how do we measure if these gates are actually working, it found out that really only 6 out of the 15 were monitorable. The rest were these sort of ethereal things that people kind of just hoped worked. So that was just the discovery phase, right? Like, what is it there that we need to monitor? Step one. So get a bunch of people in the room. What is, all your different verticals that you support, and how do we monitor this thing? Step two is, okay, well, let's try and get something to monitor that we can't. Given that we identified a couple things we can monitor, let's test to see if it works. I put this alert in here. Does it actually work? Well, it turns out breaking production is not a great way of testing this thing. But what we found out is that there wasn't a sandbox for us to actually test in. How can we enable our IT engineers and IT organizations to build modern solutions when they don't really have a sandbox to test in? Kind of why network digital twin comes into play, because it allows you to have a production level network environment that you can test in relative low risk environments, because it's not have to connect to anything, but it's like enough that tests or insight and conclusions we make here can be confidently pushed to production over here. And since we're using automation to deploy those changes, we know that I'm not injecting any human risk into that deploy. And all that to be said is, you have the entire IT organization working together, because an end user on their laptop and everything in between there requires multiple teams. And so and that's a relatively mature enterprise. And so when we see them kind of having these kind of issues, it's just a microcosm of the larger picture, which is we don't build systems to be monitorable or measurable. That's just not something we've done in the past. And given the scale and the other external pressures that we're seeing, it's becoming a requirement.
Yeah. It reminds me that the customer has to be the integrator to a certain extent, because you're inevitably building systems from disparate parts or things that have to work together. And those vendors that were building them, depending on how mature the standards are that they're playing in and what you're trying to do, could make a difference. But yeah, in general, you're probably going to have something unique. Well, actually, you know what? And this leads us into a great, how can WWT help? Because I feel like that's part of a big thing that you do with the ATC and everything that kind of comes out of the Advanced Technology Center, which is the ability to actually recreate a version of an environment that's got all those hairy steps in them. What would you suggest for full context operations? What type of resources does Worldwide provide for someone, everything from someone maybe dipping their toe in the water because they've realized the writing's on the wall, they need to get something done, to others who are doing this, but running into the inevitable challenges of keeping it moving forward, perhaps? I assume you can meet both needs.
Yeah, it's a good plug there with the ATC. Just having a sandbox with the gear that your company or enterprise will be using is a great way to de-risk a deploy. It can be scary to have change, and not only scary, but it can be detrimental to your business in some cases. But it can also be accelerative to your business, and it could be revolutionary as well if it's done in the right way. And so the ATC helps do that. We can also do an engagement where we just roadmap and showcase what a 6, 9 month, 12 month, 18, 2, 3 year plan would look like in terms of what your goals want to be and the plan to get there, all the way up to executing on that work. We can do it all pretty much.
Yeah, you guys, you have got full options available for workshops for someone who wants to come in and maybe not have to interact so much, but kind of learn and have the potential for going in, and then you offer much more consultative stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, just do the automation. Just get the ear of someone who does automation in the company and get them in front of someone here, because most likely the benefits are immeasurable. I mean, the biggest one is onboarding a new person. I can't tell you how many businesses out there it takes 2 weeks or longer to actually onboard a new employee into the fold. That, in my opinion, that is a day activity that could be all automated.
Yeah.
And that's dollars and cents right there.
Yeah. That's a very common problem, I think, because even the best
Everyone.
companies I work for, everything works really well, but boy, there's a rough month. It felt like at the beginning, and you felt for the people. Final question just would be just kind of a summary thing here, but if everybody's just a little bit clouded on all this, what's the one thing that you wish more executives or anybody watching the material would remember or take away from this?
The theme of understanding the assets or inventory of your IT organization. So what physical things exist out there that prop up the business from a technology perspective? Now I would then say, how is the data from all of that being combined together to make business insights easier to answer? Those are the two things that I would suggest. And third for bonus measure would be how ready are you for the AI to consume that data, because that's the next step.
Yeah, that's happening. You need to expect that and go forward. Well, excellent. Well, Tree, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rob.
Remember that checkout system we talked about at the start? Well, in a traditional organization, that outage becomes a blame game. But with full context operations, it becomes something entirely different: actionable intelligence. So instead of something's broken, you get checkout is down. It's costing us $10,000 per minute. And it's caused by database latency spikes that correlate with yesterday's network changes. So instead of a war room full of finger pointing, you get the right person fixing the right problem in minutes, not hours. That transformation from chaos to clarity, from reactive to proactive, this is what full context operations delivers. It's the difference between managing technology and leveraging it. Throughout this Automation Party series, we've built the foundation, right? Establishing your source of truth, automating asset lifecycle management, and preparing for AI implementation. But it's this fourth priority that transforms everything else from operational necessity into competitive advantage. So, if you're ready to make that transformation, WWT has a wealth of resources to guide you. You can start with the AI Ops Strategic Roadmap Workshop. This will allow you to assess where you are and chart your path forward with solid quick wins as well as a long-term strategy. You could also break free from vendor lock-in with WWT's guide to rethinking observability with a modern composable architecture. This is monitoring that is built to evolve with your business. Now, if you're still not sure, you could explore everything they offer at the Observability and AI Ops Resource Center. You've got labs, case studies, and expert insights all in one place. Great one to bookmark. You can also, of course, download the complete automation priorities for 2025 research at wwt.com and see how all 4 priorities work together. The next time your systems have issues, you won't just know that they're broken. You'll know exactly why it matters, what it's costing, and how to fix it fast. That's the promise of full context operations, and it's within reach. Well, I'm Rob Boyd. Thanks for joining us on WWT Presents Research.
This episode is supported by Island. What if the enterprise had complete control over the browser? Island provides a single space where everything organizations need to work safely and productively is built in. Island, the enterprise browser.